if you haven't heard, I recently launched a Patreon with 6 different tiers of support, including gameplay analysis, video commissions, and coaching. So please go check it out. Also, don't forget to use the code plugin at unfunstuff.com to save 5% off your order. And if you've got new players signing up for the UGN, my referral code is ACE. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. All these are great ways to help support the channel, and I really appreciate it. Every little bit really does help when it comes to the YouTube game. So thank you very much for your support, and thank you to my patrons for making this video possible. Enjoy the video, guys.
What a maneuver!
So I went back and I looked at my initial impressions of Ojiro2. And it's funny because I was expecting to be a little bit lower on the tier list because I remember not liking this character very much. And it's funny because the things I say about Ojiro2, and this is basically on his release, right? This is leading up to Nats, but before we've actually physically played with the cards and stuff like that. So my takes were that I don't like the character very much. It feels very bad to lose to him. He sends things for +4/+4 too often. And what I got, which I feel like I got all of that right. But what I got wrong was that he doesn't activate card draw effects very often. And what I meant by that was, at the time, his best card draw symbols were probably water, and maybe all. And again, like, the card draw and all was a little specific. And the impact of the Missouri Smash addition to the deck, the really weird incidental card draw from Kirishima cards, or like, you know, a hand advantage from Hardened Jab, stuff like that. The impact of seizing the advantage, all of that was something that I did miss, right? And when I put him in this third tier, the other part of the explanation is basically that he is a 6 hand size character with no defense. And historically, that has not been very powerful in universes. At least not while I've been playing. And it's tough for my brain to wrap its little head around the idea that a character with no defensive ability who doesn't have like a busted once per game, because if you look at this this up here, you know, at the field tier basically that I have here, you have characters that have tons of card draw, and then they usually have a defensive ability, and if they don't, they have some game breaking thing. I definitely had Coda way too high, or I guess this tier list isn't really what characters are best. And so I didn't want to do that again. I wasn't like a fan of the way this tier is set up, because this was decks you'd play if you were serious about winning. Decks I expect to see is the second tier, right? It's not really in order of how good a character is, which is why I can still claim to be the most accurate tier list, right? I mean, even if it wasn't, I think that still ended up being accurate, even if you did go by power level. But for the most part, the depiction of the tier he's in is the character specialist tier. And I think that was pretty much true. The people who kind of registered Ojiro2 and made splashes with it first were people who talked about having tons of reps on it and working on it to get the ratios right and hammering it down in a, I guess, more traditional style of deck building. I guess, you know, like a less, I don't know, less UFS-y, less universes-y, and more traditional, like, other card games. Which is just a whole lot to say that it felt so bad to lose to him back then, and now it still feels so bad. It feels like a non-game. And he just, all the things that I had that were negatives about the character have pretty much been proven false. He now has the card advantage. He has the card draw. I mean, you don't have to activate his chivalrous. You know, you don't have to jump through any hoops to get Frigid Heatwave online or to do a mediator or, I don't know, staff striking, whatever weird shit people were doing. So, at the same time, the point of the video, and you may have noticed from the title, is it's in defense of Ojiro2. And I know that there's a lot of hate around the character, and I myself would think that something does need to be done about the character. I think that it's not something you can just... basically, I think if you try to power creep around it, that's not a great idea. But I wanted to talk a little bit about how this could have happened. And this is nothing to do with Jasco, really. This is not my speculation necessarily on their design process, but the speculation on perceptions and at least the game as I know it. And so, again, historically, characters that don't have defensive abilities not been considered very strong. Ojiro has access to one of the best defensive pieces for the type of game he forces you to play. Learning the standards is not a card that many decks got to use very well. It's not a card that you could usually afford to take against like a Tokoyami or like it's supposed to be really good against Summon Dark Shadow, but to activate it you have to take a full third of your health, like minimum, right? So it's very nebulous on how much mileage you'll actually get from something like that. On top of that, when it came to this format, again, like I'm assuming Eraserhead is going to be a serious competitor, and Eraserhead's just, it continues to struggle. I'm not going to be super shitty about it. Hopefully Levi is watching this and recognizes I didn't take a cheap shot at Eraserhead for once. And I keep putting him at the top of the tier. On paper, it makes sense. But it just hasn't proven to be a really tight-knit, you know, easily solved, I guess easy to play, whatever you want to say, kind of a deck for Eraserhead to continue showing up. And so I think that my perception, again, I'm not trying to put words in anyone's mouth, but my perception of how we got here is universes, much like a fighting game, honestly, rewards you for doing nothing. And what I mean by that is, for those who don't know, for those who aren't familiar with fighting games at all, right, you have turns in fighting games, and your turn is usually forfeited by you. And the control check is maybe the most obvious example of something like that. You're losing control of the situation. Most traditionally, you lose your turn by your opponent by either missing an attack or your opponent blocking an attack that has too much recovery, right? You got blocked and your character has to stand there and then get hit. So, and in fighting games, right, you're blocking by just basically standing there, by just holding back and doing nothing. And that's how you win, is you block the right things and eventually someone does something that is unsafe, something that forfeits their turn. And there's, you know, millions of nuances and tiny minutia that fighting games have to make that more interesting than just, if I block a lot, I get to hit you. Because that game's not fun. That game's called Tekken 5. That game's not fun. So like, you see in fighting games that there is almost like a turtle-first strategy for a lot of old games. You know, a lot of like pre-2010, like pre-esports era fighting games. They have like that sort of a that sort of a mindset. The winning for doing nothing. The I don't have to do anything. I need to put my opponent, my rival, into situations where they have to take risk, where they have to do things, where they have to guess. You know, where they have to, you know, offer some sort of risk that I can guess right and take advantage of, etc. And so, while I don't think that was ever super intentional, and fighting games have designed away from that, I think card games have designed away from that too. And in general, most games have. Like, I think the average casual fan or whatever of pretty much any genre, the masses, if you will, They want to just be doing things. They want to do their deck's things. They want to do their characters' things in whatever game they're playing. And, you know, if they win by doing their things, cool. And if their opponent wins by doing their things, that's how it's supposed to be. And so the way the readying foundations and drawing up to your hand size works, I mean, you see it in Magic, right? Magic the Gathering is the most derivative, right? Card game, everything loosely comes through one of their designs. You see it where you want to spend the mana on the rival's end step, and so you get to ready up, and like the best way to use your mana effectively, right? And we have that through blocking. We have that through the opponent using foundations, committing foundations to try to attack, and if we survive, we typically have an advantage at that point. And so I think that there is, even when there's powerful offense, right, if it's available to a majority of characters and to a majority of play styles and things like that, then it's still down to whoever has like the best defensive piece. You know, if you have two Ojiros and one has learning list standards out and the other doesn't, well, you probably, you know, it's your best chance to survive, I guess. So what I'm trying to say is that when it comes to historical formats, as long as I've been playing, there's always some edge that's given to defensive decks. Even the best offensive decks I've seen, even the closest thing to aggro decks I've seen, which there's been a few. I think Tim Keefe won back-to-back with what you would call aggro decks, right? They tend to have some of the strongest interaction on the symbols. So, you know, very similar to Seizing the Advantage. I'm sure Hunt for Spiders and Dragons was all over Tim Keefe's, maybe not all over, I don't know how many copies, but I would be surprised if he wasn't playing Hunt for Spiders and Dragons in his Spike deck that won. You know, it's the same thing. It's you play it into the card pool, it builds down and flips something, right? So +1 difficulty, +1 foundation. Same card, pretty much. Except it didn't give speed. It didn't make it easier to hit. So even a deck like that has like a really powerful defensive trick built into its kit. You know, it has, you know, an attack wipe, an attack negate. It has access to powerful cancels, powerful control elements, and there's so much like good control because there's so many points of interaction in this game that a lot of times I think that the balance and the designs are pushing offense to its breaking limit, you know, to its, you know, we're pushing it as aggressive as we can pretty much just to see if we can finally beat defensive metas. Even when the super fast aggro life Osuis were cropping up and kind of taking over and becoming the deck of the month, I mean, we still had Kirishima winning tournaments, right? We still had Water Osui making it to the finals. We still had Momo on the horizon. You know, Momo was coming out. And so, you know, every format I feel like has still favored the deck that blocks really good, even all the way up into the HLC. You know, Nationals, I mean, you could make the case that Tokoyami gets +3 to check to block and has a speed reset with Encouraging, which we saw used offensively, which is very difficult to play around. And Breaker 2 blocks. You know, he has Breaker 1s and Breaker 2s like everywhere in that deck. So he still has some kind of cool defensive trick that is like related to his character with Summon Dark Shadow, right? So the picking up an extra block and getting the bonus to the check counts, -1 damage even really counts, like we saw at Nationals. And and I think that it's very easy to overlook how difficult it can be to build these aggro decks and to really make it a force to be reckoned with in the format. And again, it's a lot of it's due to just this mass of like how much can we push offense. And one of the questions I ask a lot is if there was a foundation, it's a 2-5, we'll say 2 difficulty, 5 control, plus 3 mid block, very average foundation, and all it does is enhance commit, add damage, plus X damage. How big, no caveats, no keyword gate, how big does that bonus have to be for you to consider running that card? How much damage would you realistically need on E commit plus X damage to consider running a 2 difficulty foundation that only does that? I think it's like 4 or 5, which is kind of absurd, But, I mean, carbo loading is like right there. Carbo loading is a 3 diff that E commits for 3 damage. And if you couldn't do it a second time, if you couldn't do it with other foundations, I don't think people would play it. If it wasn't essentially free one time, we wouldn't even play it, right? So, how good does that effect have to be? Realistically, I think it would have to be at least 5 damage to really be contributing, considered the part of the success of a deck. Maybe non-throw. Maybe I'd have to put non-throw on there. But I'm talking, we'd have to get the Nomu numbers. So, when it comes to pushing offense, I really wanted to believe that Ojiro was a cute little combo deck. Character specialist here. Like I said, this is the Jose Narono can top with anything he feels like tier. So it was very difficult to believe that we're here. And it's still, in the back of my mind, I'm still like, there's Eraserheads have been beating him at provisionals and, but that's a 8-person, maybe 16-person event where there's like a third of it is Ojiros and you're guaranteed to run into at least 1 or 2 in the finals or something. Really condensed spaces. In the back of my mind, it's got to be like Momo can still survive. I think Nate DeWalt feels pretty good about that matchup, and I'm sure it's one of his tougher matches. I'm sure Ojiro has a tougher time with Momo than a lot of other decks, because right now, if I want to play defense, I have to be able to use my committed foundations. I was trying to build an anti-Ojiro2 deck on a couple different symbols, and the thing I kept running into was, if I'm not playing release, if I'm not playing a character that destroys foundations for minus speed, which I think is just Momo, I can't feel good about my stage. If I'm not using committed foundations for something, like self-sacrificing, and got to be a better rate than that even, I don't feel like I'm going to be able to play defense. And so that doesn't feel like playing the game. That doesn't feel like having those options. So in defense of Ojiro2, I want to say I think he has a cool gimmick. I think that pushing his numbers, I can understand, right? Where this is something that happened because so many good defensive decks just exist. And he doesn't have any defense, and so when you do survive at just 1 life, and you draw 4 attacks back and he's tapped out from attacking, like he's probably done, especially since you gotta pop off the lane the standards, man. I saw so many Ojiros want to wait for like the second attack to make sure their opponent wasn't just poking, and then it got stunned out or committed or something by the second attack. So yeah, it's a tough deck to punish sometimes in like a really weird way. It solved all of its problems that I thought it was going to have when, cards like Chivalrous came out and when the Missouri Smash was like, oh, we get to play this now. And I get it. Like, Momo was super dominant and people complained about it, and people still complain about it when people are blocking all the time and surviving, I had someone deal like 50 damage to me on stream while I was a recovery girl. And I'm like, you still got this, bro. Like, I don't know why you're complaining that I'm still alive. Like, clearly, like, your deck is getting, and he's talking about it's his silly meme casual deck. It's not like finely tuned for winning tournaments or anything, but it has carbo loading, so it can do 50 damage if it draws all of its dual needle lunges, right? So even through all the times when people were really upset at like Momo, I was watching decks being built to just kill them. But I cannot build a deck that just survives Ojiro, or at least it really doesn't feel that way. And the decks that have maybe the best chance at beating specifically Ojiro seem to not make it into top cuts, even when played by players that I greatly respect. So I love the idea of the zone play gimmicks. I like the idea of recycling an attack, and I like the idea of it being like this cool. I like playing the mental game of just playing like 2 zones, and my opponent keeps waiting for the third one and deciding which one I'm going to pick up. But it's not about that. There's no mental game. There's no back and forth. There's just punch after punch after punch. And I think that the issue really boils down to jab, chop, smash, haymaker. If you go back and you look at basically every Earth deck, every good symbol deck that's doing really well, they seem to all have at least 3 out of 4 of these attacks. You go all the way back to set 1. Kirishima 1 doesn't have back alley haymaker, but he sure does have Texas, chop, jab. Playing Frenzy back then. Frenzy was kind of like the Missouri Smash, right? If you block Frenzy, he gets to build 1 down and clear his card pool. If you block Missouri deals, you get to build 1 down, right? So same zone, same idea for the most part. It's just how it goes. He got access to things that actually deal damage and draw cards. He got access to activating those card draw cards. So it just feels like if we ever print a character even close to this offensively good, we just run into the same attacks. And like Kirishima was not adding buckets of speed. Kirishima 2 was not adding a bunch of numbers to these cards. He was just able to play more of them than you. This whole style of lineup is not even meant to accentuate getting numbers and accentuate getting stats. It's meant to play more of the game than you will ever get to. And it's just really depressing how little he has to hit you while being able to build free foundations, draw extra cards, do both. Sort of do both too here. So I really think that I would love to see the game designed away from numbers. It's really cool that they made +1s matter. But the +1s are everywhere, and they're free, and they're repeatable. And we've just moved on to characters that give more than +1. The format has clearly moved towards characters that do more than +1s. And every character that's topping pretty much is doing tons of stats, right? Or repeatable stats. There's very few, there's almost no character I think that does like a once per turn stat pump, right? And the ones that do are just never showing up. So this is getting a little rambly, but I just I want to wrap this up by saying I like the idea, and I get that defense is so preferential due to the mechanics of the game that it can be difficult to want to enable defense and lock people out of games and sit there and have this staring contest of, well, I'm just going to block on a 3 forever because everything's so slow. But at the same time, it just feels like this character has gotten every single thing it needs to just be the least interactable deck, to play the shortest possible games, to have all of its attacks do basically the same stuff. And there's no mini game, there's no cool combos, there's no cute sequencing anymore. I don't know. I'm playing this deck I'm recording this before the monthly Monday Mayhem, and maybe I'll change my mind after playing it a bit more, but I don't like this character. I don't like this deck. I don't typically do well with characters I don't like very much, so we'll see how it goes. But it should have been cool. It should have been a cute, I have a pet Ojiro deck that is still really strong when it pops off and it has some really great turns, but not this deck that locks people out of playing the game. Not this deck that just says, I'm actually going to draw too many cards, which means I'm actually going to see attacks that I need, and they're all good because they're all pumped. I don't know if you guys have heard the Todoroki 2 problem. This is probably stolen from Andrew Holder. Which shout outs to him for, I think, just building this deck. This is supposed to be Zach Pasley's deck that I've got up in front of me. And I did some research. I looked back and like all these decks are playing jab, chop, smash, haymaker. Chop sometimes gets replaced, but whatever, right? But he says that you have the Todoroki 2 problem where you look at every attack and you go, wow, this is really cool in Todoroki 2. It's a +2/+2 stun 2 move. And his dream, Todoroki's dream, gets shattered. You get woken up because he realizes that's only one attack per turn. He only gets to do that one time. In Ojiro, man, it's every attack. It's every time. And you get to pick the sumbitch up and do it again. I just don't understand how this has been able to be solved for so long. Because again, I didn't see it coming. On release, I didn't say this character is going to dominate the format. Set 4 didn't do shit, right? Like, Set 4 didn't do anything for him. He got saving Bakugo so he can play against his own fucking mirror match better. Like, that's the crux of the issue, too, is one of the best ways to play against Ojiro is to play Ojiro. It's to play learning the standards. It's to play the stun hate that the Earth symbol gets. You know, it can't be fixed, and someone with style are some of the best ways to counteract his overload of stuns and snack times. Chivalrous competitors and other anti-flip for seizing right. So, like, I really hate that design too, but I won't get into it right now. I really hate when, like, a symbol just has the answer to its own problem, though. It's gross. It encourages stuff like this, so... Maybe Monthly Monday Mayhem won't just have a bunch of Ojiros with Kirishima's assistants thrown into it, but I'm not holding my breath. But I hope that Ojiro goes down as a really cool experiment that became a nightmare. And then it didn't ruin more than one provisional, or regional, I should say, but... Yeah, I guess that's really it. I didn't really have like a clear goal coming into this. I just wanted to get my thoughts, and hopefully you guys enjoyed this mini rant about how aggro should be allowed, aggro should be okay, and aggro has a very tough time finding its place in a card game system like Universes. So I think a lot of the rhetoric has gotten a little heated around Ojiro. I think there's a little too much passion maybe being misdirected. And so I just want to say, I think it was a really neat idea. I think that the mini game that was supposed to exist is really neat. But right now, it doesn't matter if you ban Student of the Art. It doesn't matter if you hit Hardened Jab or just one of these attacks. He just is incredibly consistent. He reduces your consistency with all these ways to make you stun foundations. And, you know, one with nature is what it is. And I want them to look at Ojiro2 and say, we now know how to make a really strong aggro character. Let's make one that is really good for the game. Let's make one that is really fun to play and has like a cool Shigaraki style minigame. You know, have one that has implications other than how good you are at blocking. I don't know. But I like the idea of the character on release. I thought it was going to be a goofy, funny, haha combo deck that sometimes has a big goofy move, but it turns out it's all of them. They're all big and they're all goofy.